Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brendan Pugh. Today we have Ronit J with us, and he is an India-based author. And we're going to talk about some of his books. He has a book out that's a collection of short stories called Abandoned by the Gods, as well as another book called Help, My Dog is the Chosen One, that sounds super interesting to me. So, how are you? And welcome to the show.
Hey Brandon, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited for this interview.
Yeah, perfect. Well, why don't you give us kind of your background? How'd you get started with writing and your journey into publishing these books?
Sure. So I've always been good at writing since I was in school. Like every essay that I've written in school, I always got good feedback, not just from my teachers, but from my friends and my parents. So that's, I think, where I really felt like I could write. And that was one thing I knew I was good at. There was never any, I had other issues with self confidence, and I might not be good at other things, but writing was something that I was always 100% confident about. Then I watched Eragon, the film,
Hmm.
and I really loved the movie. I mean,
Hmm.
I was a 10-year-old kid, I think 10 or 11 when I watched the movie. I really loved it. Then I read the book. And when I read the book, that's what really ignited the passion to start writing. Because I mean, just the world of Allegatia that he's created. I hadn't watched Star Wars by then. I hadn't read Lord of the Rings. So Aragon was my introduction to fantasy. And the way he's explored Allegatia, the magic system, Dragon Riders. I mean, for an 11-year-old to read something about Dragon Riders, that really like triggered a lot of different fantasies in my head, which I tried to write back when I
Yeah.
was 11. Didn't work out, but I just never gave up on those stories. I just kept revisiting that world, changing bits and pieces here. Then I read Lord of the Rings, so of course that influenced my world in a different way. Then, as in when I read new fantasy series, I kept revisiting my world to the point that that world looks nothing like what it was when I was 11 years old. I'm 30 now, and
Hmm.
I'm actually revisiting that story again for what, the fifth or sixth time, but it's a completely different story. And yeah, like uh, over the years, I'm also a filmmaker, so I have made films. But even when I was writing my scripts and making my films, I always had that one writing project on the side for myself, whether it's a short story or a novel or a novella, a lot of which is not yet published or will never be published because it's just not good enough.
Hmm.
But it's been what now, 19 years since I first decided I wanted to write. And I can tell you with confidence that for 19 years, I've consistently worked on stories and consistently worked on honing my skills to be a better writer. And here I am, published. I've published two books now, and I have two more in the pipeline.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the Aragon stories. That's one of my favorites, and I got into it. I'm not much older than you. I'm 35, but I don't think I got into it until maybe the third one was coming out or something.
Hmm.
It love that, and that's a great introduction. And I think it's such a great story of having written those so young at 15, and I, yeah, it's very motivating.
I think that was another thing that really motivated me. For me, it was like, okay, if he can do it at 15, I can do it at 11, except I didn't. But I mean, it's really motivating for a kid, right? Like someone in that age group is pulling off something so amazing.
Yeah, for sure. So I believe My Dog is the Chosen One that came out first, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you talk us through kind of how that story came about and then how you went into your Abandoned by the Gods?
That's a funny story, actually. Abandoned by the Gods, the stories from that collection were written before Help My Dog. I wrote the stories in 2022. That was a world building exercise for me. I wrote one short story every month. In 2023, this is in sometime around January or February, I was dog sitting for my in laws. Uh, it's a golden retriever. Her name is Joy, and we've actually adopted her full time right now. And I was walking her on the streets, and you know, dogs, they chase cats,
Hmm.
and Joy loves chasing cats, except that the cats don't like being chased.
Yeah.
So, this one incident happened where we were entering the building, and right next to the gate, there was a cat. And naturally, Joy chases the cat. But if you know anything about street cats, they can hold their own against dogs as well.
Hmm.
And the cat got really aggressive and it raised its hackles, and it was late at night, so I don't know what it was. Maybe it was an illusion, something, some trick of the light, but I saw a flash in the cat's eyes. I'm assuming Joy also saw the flash, because she
Mm-hmm.
started whimpering and she ran away. And this event just stayed in my head. I went back home, I told my wife, oh look, this is what happened, it's really funny and cute and blah blah blah. About a month later, this is just before Camp NaNoWriMo that happens in April, and I really wanted to participate because it had been a while since I'd written a full novel. And this incident came to me first, and I'm like, okay, there's something here, like the flash in the eyes. What if the cat is a dark lord and the dog is actually the chosen one?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not exactly this, but there were a lot of different ideas that came about, and then I made like a rough plot following the hero's journey, where it's the dog that's the chosen one, not the protagonist. And how does the protagonist deal with the fact that his dog is the chosen one?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't normally write comedy, but then the humor and everything came from this weird subversion of the trope. Another thing that I unintentionally ended up writing into the draft was the anxiety aspect, because anxiety plays a huge role in the book. And I have suffered. I continue to suffer from anxiety. It's just that I've learned to manage it better today.
Mm-hmm.
And years of therapy have helped me do it. But everything that I've learned about myself and about anxiety through therapy and through self reflection, I was able to articulate it better in this story. And this blend of fantasy and anxiety, this kind of cozy treatment of having the dog as the chosen one, that somehow just fell into place as I wrote each chapter. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a plot. I plotted the whole thing, but then I ended up discovery writing certain aspects of it. The entire climax sequence, I hadn't planned it. It was supposed to be something completely different. But then when I was in the flow of writing, I think I wrote 9,000 or 12,000 words in just 2 or 3 days, and
Yeah.
everything just came together for me for that book. So, and I wrote it
Yeah.
in 1 month. So I completed Camp
Wow.
NaNoWriMo.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I would imagine the as you're figuring out the story and the interaction between the characters, that it would lend itself to some comedy pretty easily, just
Mhm.
based on that interaction. I think that's really cool. Of like, how would how would I deal with it if my dog was the chosen one and I wasn't, or something? Yeah. So it sounds like you're kind of a plotter. You like to plot. Can we get
Mhm.
into a little bit of your writing process of how you kind of go from idea to finished story?
Sure. When I was younger, I was not a plotter. I was a pantser, complete pantser. I've like discovery written a 250,000 word book.
Hmm.
Uh, in retrospect, it's not a very good book because there are no setups, there are no payoffs. The twists come out of nowhere, and the catharsis in the end is just missing because a lot of the character development that you need to have, the conflicts that need to escalate before they're resolved, all those things are just missing from that book because it was just discovery written. And the only good thing about that book is probably the prose.
Hmm.
But later on, I learned what plotting was. I learned the different story structures. I've watched Brandon Sanderson's lectures like twice or thrice, I think,
Hmm.
and that's where I discovered this concept of, it's like, it's not really it's what Brandon Sanderson does himself. He plots the key events, and then he discovery writes his way to each of those plot points.
Yeah.
And that was a process that worked best for me, because when I tried to plot, I got so involved in plotting that the writing became secondary, and that again isn't going to help anymore. But when I figured what Sanderson's process is, I thought maybe let's try implementing this, and that made everything go much faster and much smoother for me. Like what I described with Help My Dog is a chosen one.
Hmm.
It's exactly that. I had key plot points, maybe 4 or 5 plot points that I changed while discovery writing the story. But
Hmm.
in the end of the day, because I had a very clear vision of what the ending is supposed to be, I knew what I had to work towards while discovery writing each
Yeah.
sequence. And that is that has worked for me for that book. It's worked for me for every short story that I've written. And there's a very clear difference between the stories that I have discovery written and the stories that I've plotted. But it's never pure plotting or pure discovery writing. There is a blend. It's just that the ones that I plot better, tend to have better structure, tend to have a clearer vision. The setup and payoffs feel a little more organic. Whereas the ones that have discovery written end up being lacking in just maybe the plot. Like the characters stand out, but then maybe the plot is not as clear. And that's something that I'm actually working on right now with my with my third book. It's called Island of the Dying Goddess. I discovery wrote that whole book, and when I finished the rough draft, I was like, okay, maybe this is not a good book. Maybe I shouldn't announce this. I don't know what. I finished reading it just a week back, and I actually enjoyed it. There's a lot I need to change, but I realized that okay, maybe plotting isn't. You don't really need to plot it. This was just an experiment, of course. But of course, if I had plotted this book, I would have been able to write it faster because it took me a long time. I started writing it in November. I only finished it in May. If I
Hmm.
had plotted it, it probably would have finished it in February or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it'd be really hard to, even if you discovery writ everything, it'd be hard to at least not know like what the ending, like what the end scene or goal was.
Hmm.
I've seen a few people that like to do that where they just kind of write it and wherever it ends is where it ends. But I feel like for me, I have to know at least the ending, if multiple plot points in the middle. But I like what you said there, like about Brandon Sanderson's method. I think that's probably where a lot of people are, where they you have your beginning, you have your end, you have a couple of big rocks in the middle, and then you just kind of weave your way to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun. So it sounds like you're writing pretty fast though, because if you're writing, so you said it was slow, but if you wrote from November to May, like that's pretty quick for a lot of people.
It's only 77,000 words, so I don't
Mm,
think that's really that quick.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, if you can write a book in a month, 50,000 words in a single month, I think that's really fast.
yeah.
And maybe I'm comparing with the really quick writers because you have Will White releasing 2 books every year. You have
Hmm.
Sanderson he released so many books last year. I've lost count.
Yeah.
So when you compare with them, it's like okay, maybe I'm not fast enough. And given how fast the industry is moving, like you feel the need to keep up with that pace.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to be a little more disciplined with my writing. It's just that life has gotten in the way in the past 1 year. So
Sure. Sure. So you talked about Aragorn or Aragon being an influence. What are some other influences that you discovered as after that kind of initial thing? What have you discovered now, especially as we've gotten older, that you really like?
okay, my favorite fantasy series of all time is Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Okay.
I've read that series just once in my life, but its influence is still on me so much that one of the short stories from Abandoned by the Gods, I didn't even realize that I'd taken inspiration from Malazan until the point that I was making content to market the book, where I realized that one
Hmm.
of the characters inspired is very directly inspired by another character from Malazan, like Felicin Paran. Her entire arc of being a being a noble who ends up being a slave, and then she learns the power dynamics and learns how to overcome all the abuse and the oppression. It's very similar for my character Jagdasi from Servant of God. That's the title of the short story. Except the treatment is very different, of course, because Malazan has this one character for 2 full books, but I have it for I think 20 pages or something, 20 or 30 pages. So
Hmm.
it's a very short, I mean, it's a short story. The treatment is very different because, again, the world is different. The society that I'm exploring in this world is different from what Malazan is. But at its core, it's very similar.
Hmm.
And as I'm working on my current books right now, I see how Malazan's not the magic systems exactly, but the way Malazan uses the learning curve of what the world is. Because if you've read Gardens of the Moon, he just dumps you in the middle of a battle,
Hmm.
and you don't know what's happening. You kind of figure out what's happening by the end of the book, and then book two happens in a completely different continent with a whole new set of like 100 or 200 new characters.
Hmm.
And again, like trying just as you're figuring out okay what's happening, you are again through like the rug is pulled from under you, and that keeps happening for 4 or 5 books. But
Hmm.
by the end of each book, as you finally figured out this world, this you finally learn something, and then he dumps you in this finale where all these many confusing plot points just come together and they give you this very satisfying resolution where
Hmm.
everything just starts to make sense. And that's one book, that's each book. But then when you take these 10 books and you combine them with the finale, that's what it is. Like 10, you might think it's 10 random confusing things, but when they come together, it's just this very beautiful cathartic feeling in the end of like 10,000 pages of catharsis.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to build with my next, and that's what I hope to build one day. And I'm trying to figure out, like, I did it on a very small scale with Help My Dog because I did have 3 or 4 plot points which converged in the end, and it had that finale where everything comes together.
Thing about Malzahn is I haven't read it yet. I probably know the least about it.
Okay.
I heard about that pretty late, but it is on my list. I definitely am very interested because I've heard the same thing that
Yeah.
the world building can be really, really cool.
Yeah. So it's also very absurd. Okay. Like, there's a race of these dinosaurs with swords for hands, the Kishen Shamal. There's the children of the light, the children of the shadow, the children of the dark. They
Hmm.
have these undead Planimas, and it's beautiful to see how this 100,000 year old history all comes together with all these many races and how they interact with each other.
Hmm.
And I mean, just take the Kishan Shamal for example. Like, dinosaurs with swords for hands, that's a ridiculous visual. But the way he
Yeah.
uses it, and they have their own culture, they have their own social hierarchy. So that's another thing that I tried to implement in Help My Dog, where I was like, okay, it is a guy and his dog, but what more crazy things can I do with it? Let's have an eldritch god in this. Let's have an owl who is a mage. Let's have a secret service. And I brought all these things together and I somehow made it work. It's one of the things that I got good feedback for from my beta readers.
Hmm.
And again, like, I was only able to do it, like, blend all these absurd elements together because I saw Malazan do it in a serious way, and I
Hmm.
saw One Piece do it in a funny way. One
Yeah.
Piece is again another huge influence for me, which I think Daniel Green has said this in his videos as well. Malazan fans need to read One Piece, and One Piece fans need to read Malazan because
Yeah.
they are very similar in the scope. They're very similar in their absurdity. It's just the treatment that's different. Where Malazan is very serious and very grim, it also has
Hmm.
its moments of like hilarious humor.
Yeah.
One Piece is largely goofy and cartoony, but then it deals with some very hard-hitting themes at times. Like, it deals with slavery, it deals with just okay, slavery is the first thing that comes to mind because of a particular storyline in there. But
Hmm.
yeah, like, it deals with the government controlling history, erasing history,
Yeah.
controlling truth, and the media.
Yeah.
So you don't expect that from something which has people where the protagonist is a rubber man, but he does it so fantastic. So that's those are two influences that I did take for my book. Help My Dog is a Chosen One,
Hmm.
and of course Sanderson is an obvious example of influence because, like I said, I've seen his lectures a few times already, and I've learned
Hmm.
a lot from him, not just by reading his book but also by listening to the man. And
Yeah.
if you ever listen to Sanderson speak, he
Hmm.
really loves writing and he loves teaching, and it's not just in his books that he's teaching about his world. Even in his lectures, he really makes sure that you understand what the writing process is like, what the world building process is like. If he's
Hmm.
talking about character, he will go in depth and he will give you good examples that you can actually use for your own writing.
Yeah.
So I think those are the 3 top influences for me.
Yeah. I definitely always, if anyone is like, I don't know where to start with writing, I always push people to Sanderson's lectures. They're just so good.
Have you watched both versions or just the older ones? Because I think
I
there's a newer version.
Is there newer? I think I've probably
Yeah.
only watched the older versions, but maybe I should check out. Is the newer ones where he's not really in front of a class?
No,
Is
I've
he?
seen 2 versions, but both of them he was in front of the class. So
Okay, I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I always. He's. I think for everyone right now, he's a big influence. Whether you like his books or not, he's either influencing you on the storytelling side or the business side, or like how he runs his author business is, I think, really cool and inspiring. And the whole secret projects thing, of course, was like so
yeah,
mind blowing. But yeah, he's a big influence of mine for sure.
and he's creating good content on his YouTube channel. If you see,
Hmm.
like, whether it's just engagement or whether it's his podcast. Like he knows what his audience wants, and he delivers every time. Like
Yeah.
even with his trailer, if you've seen his trailers for the secret project, sorry, for the secret projects, some of them are really funny. Like the one where he dressed up as Obadiah Stane from Iron
Hmm.
Man. That was a really funny video, and like he's a really like he's a good sport
Yeah.
despite being where he is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, I listen to the podcast every week. I try to catch that because I have a small commute to my job. And so I try to catch that at least every week when it comes out for sure. So, so you have um, Abandoned by the Gods. So is that the beginning of a bigger series that you're working on?
Yes. So, Abandoned by the Gods was not a planned book. Like I said, in 2022, I wrote one short story every month. So I had 12 short stories by the end of it. And the idea behind writing those stories was because this is the world that I started working on when I was 11 years old, like
Hmm.
19 years back. I started working on it. And it's nothing like what it used to be. So I really wanted to explore this world without influencing the main story that I want to tell. So I decided to take unknown people from this world, like just laymen. It doesn't even have to be like kings and queens. It's just some random villager in this random village which doesn't affect the main story,
Hmm.
and explore what the world might look like. Explore so what the social hierarchy might be like. I do have a caste system in my book. So how could that influence people's lives? What kind of religion exists in this world? What kind of gods exist in this world? Why are they the way they are? And etc. etc. I had a lot of questions that I want to answer.
Hmm.
And these short stories was my way of exploring these questions that I had. Of those, like I think these four that I've put in the collection are the best, the ones that stood out the most for me. And the similarity between all four is that each of these stories happens parallel to an important event in the main story.
Hmm.
And this is again an observation I made while putting the collection together, which is why I was able to use it. But yeah, like you said, it is the beginning of something, but you don't need to read these stories to read the book I am writing right now.
Hmm.
And even if you read that book and come to these stories, they're fairly detached, so they are fairly independent.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. I really appreciate that you continue to kind of stick with that idea you had when you're 11 because the story I'm working on, same thing. I came up with it, gosh, 15, 16, 17 years ago, like a long time, and it's morphed a lot and it's changed and um started as one thing, and it's still got some of those core essence elements of it,
Mhm.
but it's definitely very different now. And but it's there's something about, like, even though I haven't cracked the puzzle of it, it's like it's the story I want to tell, and it's in there. I just continue to try to find it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that the same for so is it just kind of like you just feel the itch, like it's just like I got to get this written someday?
yeah, it is the itch, but also I think the story I wanted to tell at 11, I was not mature enough to be able to tell it. I didn't have
Mhm.
enough life experience to be able to tell it. Right now, I do. And it's not just maturity and life experience, but also I've seen a lot more of the world than I had when I was 11. So I have a lot of opinions about things. I know which of my opinions are right, which of my opinions I need to work on, because I those opinions are just influenced by my bias and by my past.
Mhm.
So having the maturity to admit that okay, I'm wrong, and then put that into my story is something I would never have done at 11. And only because I'm able to see the other's perspective today, like even if I don't agree with a particular character's philosophy, it's important for this character to have that philosophy because that adds to a larger discourse in the book. And to
Mhm.
be able to pull that off by giving justice to that one philosophy, despite me not agreeing with it, is something that I can do today. And
Mhm.
like do it right, not the way I would have done at 11. Because if I had to tell the story at 11, it would be very one sided, it would be very juvenile. It was very juvenile when I wrote it.
Mhm.
And all this while understanding how stories work, having a good structure in the book. having clear setups and payoffs, having multiple storylines converge into a finale like a Sanderland,
Hmm.
and making sure that if it's going too long, then I give people enough in the middle to keep at it. Because there are some books I've read which sometimes what like even Malazan, for example, like sometimes what happens is things are just happening for a very long time, and there is there is no excitement in the middle. It just keeps dragging. Actually, this is a feature of Wheel of Time. The
Hmm.
last book I read, it had a great ending, but then the first 80% of the book was just a slog. And this
Yeah.
is one of the slog books. And I think Sanderson also talks about Wheel of Time in his lectures, where he's like, when you have these very long series, you need to give catharsis every once in a while. You have to give people closure to the storylines you build up, because the longer you go without closure, the longer you go without that catharsis, people are going to start getting bored, are going to start feeling overwhelmed because you're just not giving them what they are there for.
Hmm.
So to be able to do, if because I am planning a really long book, so I need to plan it in a way where I give my audience that catharsis maybe twice before I give them the finale, or
Yeah.
more times, and to have the patience to sit down and plan it out, and
Hmm.
then discovery write it. And if I'm figuring out that okay, what I'm discovery writing is better than what I've plotted, then go back to the drawing board and make those reconnect it in a way where it all fits back. To
Yeah.
have the patience to do it, to have the experience to do it. That's what I can do today. So yes, the itch is what starts it, but then there's all this hard work, all this learning that I can implement today.
Yeah.
So it's also that.
Yeah. I think Stormlight Archive probably does that so well in that each book, like I remember when I first finished Way of Kings, it's like each book has such an incredibly satisfying ending where you're just like, this is so cool. It really works. But then he leaves so many awesome breadcrumbs for the next. And so I think with Stormlight specifically, he's really doing that well, where you get that kind of the release of he wrapped up the story, but here we go. We're going into the next one. So yeah, love that.
I'm
So
actually reading
okay.
Rhythm of War right now, and I don't know why, but I maybe it's caused me fatigue, but I love the first three books. I'm not able to enjoy Rhythm. Like I'm halfway through the book right now, and I
Hmm.
finished other books because I had to take a break from this one.
Yeah.
So, is have you read Rhythm of War? Do you think the
So I haven't read Rhythm of War yet. I've read the first three. I love
okay?
those. I'm currently reading Tress of the Emerald Sea,
Oh, that's
but I definitely find that, especially with those big, thick books,
hmm.
I finish one and then I need to read something shorter. So I always kind of put a book or two in between each one. Part of that's because I'm a little bit of a slow reader. So, but I also get kind of, I just need to refresh a little, if that makes sense.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
I don't. I like you said. I need those two, three books between the big fat ones because
Yeah.
I need to be patient with the big fat ones. You know.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm excited to read Rhythm of War. I'm getting back. I think when I finish Tress, I'm going to jump into that one for sure.
Yeah. Dress is a beautiful read. Like
Yeah.
it's one of his best for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So far, it's, I think I'm just like a third of the way through. It's just, it feels like such a light read, but like the stakes are good. Like it's just a good, honestly, I was just talking to someone the other day about, if someone was to ask me like, where would you start with the Cosmere? Most people would probably say like Mistborn or something like that. Maybe Elantris. But I think I would tell people to start with Tress at this point. Like it's just a very easy read. It doesn't totally seem to affect everything else yet. Like so it's just a good entry point, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely.
Yeah. So is this project, are you planning it to be many books? Is it going to be a long series or is it just maybe like a trilogy or something?
Yeah. For now, it's just a trilogy.
Hmm.
I'm planning it in a way that the story that I want to tell with this trilogy is going to be self-contained.
Hmm.
I might explore more story. I mean, I will explore more stories in the larger world, but this story ends with this. I don't want people to have to read like three trilogies to make sense of the next one or anything
Hmm.
like that. And I think that's something that Sanderson did really well with his initial Cosmere books because Mistborn, Elantris, Warbreaker, Stormlight, all of them are relatively self-contained, right? Like it's only after the end of Era 2 of Mistborn where things have started, like the gloves are off and
Hmm.
everything is a lot more Cosmere aware right now.
Yeah.
But if you really want to enjoy Mistborn, you can just read Era 1 and it's a fantastic trilogy by itself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I want to do, but I don't want anything to be overwhelming because there's too many books to read out there. And I mean, Marvel's facing that problem right now, right? Like they're
Hmm.
in what, phase 5 or phase 6, and
Yeah.
it's all over the place right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to end up like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where Sanderson's being pretty smart. He's very slowly, which is similar to like the first phase of Marvel. It's very slow. There wasn't a lot of connections at first, but yeah, Marvel's definitely just kind of starting to implode on itself from just like the weight of what they created. And so, yeah, I think Marvel will eventually maybe find their way, but it's definitely something to think about if you're creating a longer story of like how do these connect and then how much connection is a good thing, you know? Yeah. Do so what's the favorite part of the writing process for you? So do you like working on characters, world building, creating a magic system? Like, is there a particular part that's like, this is where I like to start with?
Uh, Characters is where I start with, and plot is where I have the most fun with.
Hmm.
Like for me, creating characters is something that uh, I mean, I always think of weird scenarios that I have these random people in, and the way these people react to that scenario is what ends up being my character.
Hmm.
Like with Help My Dog, it was an incident I saw right there, and then I put in my anxiety in that situation, and that's what snowballed into my book. Similarly, like in Abandoned by the Gods, there's one the character of Jagdasi that I mentioned, who happened to be inspired by Thalesin Paran. That is a story I'd read about. Like there is an actual system of Devdasis in India where I don't think it's still happening, or maybe it is in very remote places. But women were essentially, I don't want to say sold to the temples, but they dedicated their lives to the temple.
Hmm.
And yeah, it started off as a practice of devotion, but then eventually, as with everything, corruption ended up ruining it. And
Hmm.
that was the story I wanted to explore. That I found to be a very interesting story. So I took this one random character, just an innocent girl who ends up in this vicious system of horror. And yeah, it's just a story that you see unfold through her eyes and her losing faith and just becoming that powerful entity and by manipulating the people around her and finding out that she herself is being manipulated in different ways and just understanding the politics of it, understanding the power dynamics between different people and what power and influence even is for practically nobody to learn and then like become the epitome of it. That was a story I wanted to tell. So there in this one story, it ended up being the concept first, then
Hmm.
came the character, and then the plot. And when I say I have the most fun with plot, it's because like I get to experience the entire story in like a miniature because I use Figma because I find that to be the easiest for me. I just like make notes, I put them all around, and then I play around with them.
Hmm.
It's kind of like playing with a whiteboard, except it's on my laptop. If you see, I think one of my recent blog posts, I did have a blurred screenshot of what I have planned for my next book. It's still untitled, but I'm structuring it similar to Stormlight Archive, where I have 5 books separated by interludes and bookended by a prologue and an epilogue. But
Hmm.
then I've plotted that whole book down, like the 250,000 okay, word book that I have. I've plotted it down to the chapter. Like I
Hmm.
know, like if there's I think 6 POVs, how those 6 POVs play out through these 72 chapters. I've actually plotted it down, and it took me like quite a long time to do it. But then uh, it was fun to like find connections between these two random stories happening, and then how I can converge them. How a theme from this can be resolved in this story, and then like it's like a puzzle coming together, like a jigsaw puzzle. That that's
Yeah.
where I have the most fun with in the writing process.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of same. I used to be a little more frustrated with myself that I haven't got my series out and done yet. But at the same time, I kind of realized not too recently that I the time has allowed me to really find all those connections of all the different points of view and the things to explore. And so at the end of the day, I think ultimately it will be better for that because it's just given me enough time to really figure it all out, the plot and how each character interacts and their backstories. And so it's a big task for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have so you're this one you got a trilogy. Are you gonna write those all the way through or do you wanna are you gonna maybe insert a couple of projects in between the big books?
Let's see. I don't have a plan.
Yeah.
I mean, the rough plan is to just write the trilogy, but I mean, I always have ideas brewing in my mind. So if something interests me, I might just take a break and work on
Yeah.
that. Island of the Dying Goddess was again not a planned book. It was just a NaNoWriMo book that I thought, let's just write it. And it ended up being something that I didn't know I wanted to explore, but ended up being something that I really needed to write. And when I start revealing more things about the book, I will talk about why it's so important to me. But
Hmm.
right now, that's all I'll say.
Yeah. I appreciate that you're willing to also take on important topics and themes within your stories. Is there a reason for that, or are you just wanting to really tell a story that reveals truths about the world?
Um, I think that comes from the filmmaking side for me
Hmm.
because I really started exploring world cinema when I was 18 in 2012. And the stories I found in world cinema and parallel cinema in India, those stories ended up staying with me way more than the blockbusters and the entertainers. Because there was like this inherent human truth in these films. Those truths are found in Malazan. Those truths are found in Lord of the Rings, and you will find those truths within a lot of these holy books. The Bible, the Gita.
Hmm.
Those books are influential. Malazan is influential because they hold some inherent human truth, and I think that's why I want to be able to create something that says something about the human condition. If it can make you think, ponder over your own life, if it can make you just question something or
Hmm.
just question a particular norm, that okay, this is the norm, but is it right? Can we do better?
Yeah.
And when you ask yourself these questions, you will come back to the answers after having pondered over it for days, years, maybe. And you'll realize that the stories that made you think of these questions have stayed with you, and that's why you keep asking yourself this question. There's a reason why you keep exploring this particular theme or this subject.
Yeah.
And when you finally come to that conclusion, when you finally make those connections, and you're like, okay, I know what I think, I know what I want from this answer, I know what it says about me. It's a very fulfilling feeling, and
Hmm.
I want to be able to give that to my readers. And I think that's the reason I keep coming to these themes. Hopefully, like when I'm done writing these stories, they do have an influence on people, not in a way that I want people to think like me. I just want people to think.
Yeah. I've said this quite a few times about Lord of the Rings. I think part of the reason that that story has endured for so long is because the whole story just is so rooted in just the universal themes about life and being a human. And like everyone can see a little bit of themselves in Frodo and in Aragorn, and we can see a little bit of Gollum. Like every character has kind of this element of humanity to it that I think we can all find something in it to relate to. And I think that's why it's just been able to stick around. I think that's why any story that has stood the test of time, I think that's why, because it's that universal theme that connects to every human, regardless of where you're from or who you are or how you grew up or they all have something that connects us to you.
Absolutely. Agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Do you, so let's get into the publishing side of things.
Mhm.
So, had you considered trying to do any traditional publishing, or was wanting to go self-published always the goal? How did you make that decision?
Uh, the original plan was to be traditionally published, except that when I started querying, I was too young to be doing it. I was
Mm-hmm.
not, again, it's the youth, it's the lack of maturity, which probably I didn't deal with well because I queried a lot of publishing houses, didn't get any responses. I wrote another book after that. I queried agents, didn't get any responses. And I came to this point where I just grew very impatient. And the way I thought of it was if I have to reach a publishing house, first I need an agent. To reach the agent, I have to wait for 3 to 6 months because a lot of the agents had that timeline. That if we don't get back to you in 3 months or we don't get back to you in 6 months, consider it a no.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I finish my draft today, I have to wait 6 months just to assume that someone has rejected it. That's way too long.
Yeah.
And I just grew impatient and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna self-publish. If nothing works out, I'm just going to self-publish. And it just so happened that by the time I decided I wanted to self-publish, I had ended up engaging with a lot of amazing stories from indie authors like Rob J. Hayes, Will White. You've seen so many success stories from the indie publishing industry,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just the success that is captivating, but the stories themselves. Like a lot of them, like if you have not, you should definitely read the God Eater Saga by
Mm-hmm.
sorry, the God Eater Saga by Rob J. Hayes. It's
Okay.
one of the best books I've read this year. And when I picked up, like I had support, I had backed the Kickstarter,
Mm-hmm.
and I got the books before the release date, and I was really happy to get them. And when I read Herald, I was like, okay, this is a slow burn. This is not what I was expecting. And then the finale happens.
Mm-hmm.
Everything just falls into place, and again, like it's like this classic misdirect which will blow your mind.
Yeah.
Everything just makes sense. Like, okay, I don't mind it's a slow burn. This was completely worth it. And he's done it as an indie author.
Yeah.
I mean, i- indie has a lot of talent. There's amazing stories, there's amazing writers. And I think one benefit of going indie is that you're allowed to experiment. No one's really influencing what kind of stories you're writing. You
Mm-hmm.
tell the story you want to tell, you publish it the way you want to, you can market it the way you want to. It's all on you. Of course, the risks are also on you, so you have to be
Yeah.
cautious. But it's just a lot more free,
Yeah.
and that appealed to me.
I definitely jumping into interviewing independent authors. It's a much bigger world than I anticipated. There's so many people writing so many great stories, and I've been interviewing enough people now that my book list has gotten quite long. I have not gotten through everyone's stories, but just not even there's so many people writing stories, but they're so passionate about their stories and also helping others and promoting other stories. Like it's probably one of the I'm sure there's some bad actors out there, but for the most part, it's probably one of the most like healthy things I've gotten into and met people and all that. Like it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I joined Twitter because I was publishing my book, and I'd heard that Twitter is not a good place basically.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone who I've interacted with, Twitter has just been very supportive, very encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually joined SFF Insiders. I do write reviews for them,
Mm-hmm.
and again, even that Discord channel is so lively and so supportive. Like every time we are doing a cover reveal, everyone comes together, everyone goes all out, and I didn't anticipate this on Twitter, and now I'm seeing this on Discord. I'm seeing this on Instagram, and it's just a really lovely community.
Yeah. Yeah, and everyone is really rooting for everyone else. And I think that's the when you first kind of put yourself out there and you start marketing your book, you get on social media, or I think your natural reaction is to think everyone's going to be super mean or terrible, or all you're going to get is hate comments or something. 99% of the time, everyone is just super on board and super positive. So I've loved it. Yeah. Well, we're getting kind of close to the hour here. So I was kind of like to end with this question, which is that if you had one, two, or three pieces of advice for anyone who's just starting out writing, about to publish a book, what would those pieces of advice be?
Okay, this is a very easy one because this is what I would tell myself when I was starting out at 11. Number one is to share your stories with the right community. Like, make those writer friends, make those author friends, be it on Reddit, be it on Twitter, wherever you can find your people, make those friends, because to be able to share your stories and get that feedback from your community is going to make all the difference for you. I didn't do that for a very long time because I had anxiety and I was worried what people would say, and then it's just a spiral that held me back a lot in life. But when I started sharing my stories with people, not just friends, but also like strangers on Reddit, like the amount of feedback I've gotten from Reddit on just two short stories has helped me improve as a writer quite a lot. Like, it's not just that they're giving you feedback, they're giving you links to writing resources, articles that can help you improve on where you're lacking in the story. And these are strangers on the internet. They have no stake in your story. They're just being supportive. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, we just spoke about Twitter, but then this is a, another side of social media and the internet where you can find your people. So do that for sure, because the more feedback you get, the more you can improve on your writing, because nobody starts off as a, I mean, yes, there are prodigies, there are some people who just are natural born, but like natural talents, but not everyone can do that. Even if you are a natural talent, doesn't mean that you're that is going to sustain you for forever. Like, you need that discipline, you need to get that feedback so you can keep improving. That's number
Mm-hmm.
one. Number two is just be honest with yourself. Like, if you're getting negative feedback, you can't go and diss the person, hey, how can you not like my book?
Mm-hmm.
You are not the best writer, or maybe this is not the best representation of your writing. No matter what you write, there's always space for improvement. So be honest with yourself that, okay, if something is lacking, why is it lacking? It's not a comment on how good or bad you are. It's just that this piece of writing needs some improvement. What can it be? And this also applies to the fact that sometimes the best that you can do right now is not the best ever, but
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. Like, if I were to write Help My Dog Is a Chosen One right now, it would not be as good as what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it would be better, maybe it would be worse, but what I have published is the best I could do at that moment, and that's okay, because you're constantly changing, you're constantly growing. So understand what's the best you can do at that given moment, and if that is good enough, that's good enough.
Yeah. I the a quote, I don't know who said it. Someone probably knows, but one quote I really have always liked is no art is ever finished, it's only abandoned. Basically just that you're you can write and write and write your book to death, but eventually you have to release it out into the wild. And so yeah, I think you do the best you can with that whatever you're working on, and once it's out there, you just try to do better on the next one. Like that. I love that. I love that piece of advice for sure.
It's a good piece of advice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show. It's been great talking to you and meeting you. And where can we find you on all the social media stuff and all that?
So there is my website, ronitjauthor.com. I'm most active on Twitter and Instagram, where my handle is again ronitjauthor.com. No spaces, no dots, nothing. And that's my ad for pretty much everything. Facebook, Google, Goodreads. So so if you really want to interact with me, Twitter and Instagram, those are the two places.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. It's been great. And we'll make sure to put all that stuff in the description and everything. And so thanks for being here. This is Writing Quest. My name is Brennan Pugh. This is Ronit J. Make sure to check out his stuff, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Brandon. It was a pleasure being here.